Hello world of YouTube and welcome to a discography review. A couple years in the making because I've been teasing doing this in other videos where I've talked about this band, but the time has finally come for me to talk about the brainchild of artist Jamie Hewlett and musician Damon Albarn and the various creators that they have worked with therein. The Gorillaz. An interesting experiment in both the marriages of audio and video that I've loved following ever since I was a young kid, getting into singles from the first two albums and loving their music videos, their infomercials, the weird little bits that they would pop up throughout pop culture. It was an interesting thing that I've loved to see evolve, and while I won't be talking about the grand lore and stories as it's evolved, because I'll be talking about it in a sort of out-of-sequence fashion, I do encourage those that do want to get into the group to look into that stuff. Because it's just kind of cool to see where this group has gone, the group in question being frontman Tootie, guitarist Noodle, bassist Murdoch, / also Ace that one time from the Powerpuff Girls, and Russell on the drums. And also the other characters that have wrought because of those collaborations into this world. It's just cool to see. But instead, I will be ranking their discography and actually breaking my own rules that I've set with the ranking format that I've done with the show as it is now, by adding some of those oddities that they've done throughout the tenure that this project has existed. Because back in the day, they were doing some ahead-of-the-time shit that sort of, in a sort of subconscious sort of way, inspired me with how I've discussed this band in some shows that I've done in the past. It's just an interesting sort of dive, their discography, and it sort of kept being more interesting for me as I kept diving into it and sort of rationalizing with myself what I wanted to talk about. But that left me with a list of 10 projects that I'll be ranking, with one EP at the top of it all before all the rankings. One of the things I will say is that while I'll give you guys a couple of really good starting points, this ranking was pretty hard for me to do because I love this band a lot. A lot of my favorite albums have been made by this project, and even if something ends up on the lower half of it, don't suspect that it's really bad. It just may have some moments that don't add up to those classics, you know what I mean? Give it a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and talk about Meanwhile.
Cool, don't get in my way. In fact, don't migrate. Yeah, we like champagne, but we like...
Meanwhile was an EP that they dropped a year after Strange Times, which felt kind of nice. It's just 3 relaxing little collaborations that act, or feel as sort of like an interlude of sorts, you know? The grooves all flow really well into each other and have this sort of subtle evolution in each track that sort of gives them the nice little twist. I just enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot. I think that the flows from Jelani and Tracy on their respective tracks are pretty fucking good. I think that the live cut also feels like a nice, snug little injection to sort of blend the worlds in ways that they sort of done in some of their more meatier, divergent tracks. But this is nice. It's not bad. If you like the group and you never checked this out and you want some 3 chill little groove centric tracks from these guys, this EP is pretty choice. To those who spent the entire time I talked about Meanwhile wondering if I was including Laika Come Home in said 10 project ranking, prepare to be either excited or hate it, but I'm not putting it in the ranking. While I do love the project, you guys know I love the Gorillaz obviously by this point in the video, and you may know I also like laid back, dub, and reggae style jams, and this remixing of the first album that is a collaboration with Outfit Space Monkeys is great. It just doesn't quite feel like a Gorillaz project holistically. It feels like a remix project a la what like Block Party did with their first couple of albums. You know, it's not bad. I just don't put it in the same realm as everything else that I'll be talking about in this video. I do think if you like that style of music and you want to hear some parts of the Gorillaz debut reworked into the dub genre, this is a pretty good place to go. The horn play is really fun. I love their reworking of punk into depunked in particular. The horn production on that track is choice. Dub 09 I put in the Borderlands the pre-sequel in one of the playlists in one of the episodes. And I think that a lot of the laid-back energy is just reined in so tightly. Admittedly, I also think it's just way more focused than the rest of the Gorillaz sonic palette ever is. Again, it's a really cool, again, point of curiosity, like the DJ mixes that they did before Humans. This is kind of the same energy. I'd put that in. It's very tangential to the album stuff in some of the ways that I could see people saying for some of the albums I did include in the ranking, but I just omitted it from my personal ranking. Still pretty choice, still really laid back and relaxing. For those that are upset, how about I do a ranking the songs on it next summer, eh? Now let's get to the rankings proper. Now, like I said before I started the rankings, none of their records are bad. I would say The Fall is at least an interesting introduction of a concept that they would do much better on down the line. While all of their records, for the most part, have these sort of companion pieces, The Fall has the problem of being a companion to one of their best albums, first off, and an experiment that is really cool. You know, while their tangents earlier on were cut from different cloths entirely, The Fall is sort of supposed to be an intimate, on-the-road feeling project made by 2D. The album itself is made entirely on an iPad by Damon, I think on the Plastic Beach tour. It was dropped the same year, which kind of lends it feeling, given that sort of DIY twist. I just feel like they would tackle that prospect again much better down the line on other projects. I get what they were going for, especially on tracks like Little Pink Plastic Bags, with its sort of wobbling ambience that gives it the sort of feel of that stream of consciousness of an artist really just writing a song about something to get some creative energy out. This just doesn't feel like a project that would be labeled like an album, especially if projects like D-Sides are albums. Don't get me wrong, there's cool ideas on here. I also really enjoy the twinkling on revolving doors, and I think that the backbeat of that isn't too bad. Same with Hillbilly Man. I actually really love the guitar tone on that track, and it has this sort of lo-fi feel that I think Damon captures perfectly and gives this sort of, again, slice of life on the road feeling. And I think that he replicates a sort of Gorillaz feel prior to Plastic Beach, like a la tangents from those first two records on tracks like Detroit and Chi-Town, pretty amicably. I also like seeing Bobby Womack pop up on here. I think that it was cool to see him work with the group on Plastic Beach, and I think that lending to that sort of companion record to Plastic Beach feel with Bobby on Bobby and Phoenix was a good cut. Again, it kind of has this lo-fi feel and feels like a little bit more of a raw melding of his style with the group, but I think it's done pretty well. I don't know. This project isn't bad. It's just my least favorite thing that Damon's done with the project. It's still neat. It just, again, feels kind of like the weirdest thing for them to call an album, given some of the things that they've left on the cutting room floor. Like, it's just one of those projects that I can't say you should get to, really. Like, it's one of those projects that is just kind of... Like, it's just one of those projects that's an interesting curiosity for those that are getting into the group. Like, it's a cool window into some of the creative energy that Damon was pulling together with this project and avenues he wanted to explore. But I don't feel like you really gotta get to it at any point. It's just sort of there if you want to listen to some interesting odds and ends. You know, every group has a project like this at some point. And again, while they would take this energy and do more with it, it's just sort of the progenitor of that. Now their comeback, Humans, is a completely different story. While The Fall is a record that I would say sort of has qualities that are enjoyable but don't warrant a full listen in my opinion, Humans is the group coming back with 2 tons of everything. It sees Damon working with a smattering of artists, pulling together some tracks that I would say are modern favorites of mine personally. I really love Vince Staples kicking this thing open on Ascension. I think the run from that through Moments is some pure classic Gorillaz bliss with a synth-driven strobe light, Saturn Bars' laid-back groove, and Moments bringing you into the groove and settling it in while having these thematics crop up of reflections of the fame and life, as it were, with a variety of other shocking collaborations just bringing excellence, like Charger with Grace Jones, and Hallelujah Money bringing Benjamin Clementine into the mix masterfully as a really good penultimate track. Ultimately, the reason why this record is ending up this low is because while I love all of that, there's a reason why it was the first episode of Redacted, because there's a lot here, but I think that the sequencing on this album is just probably the worst in the band's whole discography. I get what Damon was trying to sort of creatively channel with the structure of this album. Again, while there are some collaborations that I cut off of my Redacted that are still really good, I feel like with the pacing as it is, it just makes them feel all the more jerky. You know, I like She's My Caller. I think that it's a cool collab with Kali Uchis. I think that the atmosphere on Carnival is pretty cool and leads really well into Let Me Out. I just think that following like Busted Blue and its intermission track, it just doesn't work for me. Like, I get why people enjoyed We Got the Power, and I think that some of the bonus tracks like Halfway to the Halfway House, which is another really good Pevin Everett collaboration, showed that Damon was pulling together some cool creative collaborations together. It's just a messy project. You know, I've heard people describe the Gorillaz approach as a band, as a project, as an everything but the single sort of ideal, but this album has sort of encapsulates that mindset in all the worst ways, in my opinion. I think that it's a pretty good album. Obviously, I gave it an 8 at the time. I'd probably give it like a 7 now. It's still a really good project. It's just a messy presentation as a whole. You know, it's one of those records that I'll sometimes spin in full, but more often than not, I will spin my Redacted just because I think that it's got everything that I liked and the pacing is not as janky. It's a project that I think you should get to, but it's not something that I would say is a top priority when getting into the band or when celebrating the band as far as spinning it again in a full sequence. This will be the last time I talk about Cracker Island for a while, okay? I know that I've given it a decent amount of stage on here now, given it's the third show I'm talking about it in 2023. But as you can see by its ranking in this discography, it really is an album that, similarly to Humans, has a lot of really cool ideas. Its sequencing is just kind of wacky in a way that I didn't like on revisits of the project, and I think that its deluxe edition did have some really choice tunes that were cut, and I don't feel like should have, because they enriched the world that I think Damon was trying to pull together with Jamie in a cool way that I just don't think they pulled together in the finished product. I still really love the grooves. I still think that more often than not, this album hits a good pocket and nails its thematics pretty choicely. It just needed a little bit of tweaking. This is going to be the redacted portion of the discography review, because these are the two records I put in that show, and they're the only two I probably would ever put in this show as it is right now with the band's discography. I still think it's really choice. I think you should get to this before you get to Humans, honestly, because I think that the groovy side that Damon wanted to experiment with musically on here is done pretty fucking well, in my opinion, and he brought together some choice collaborations in those prospects, like I talked about with Stevie Nicks and Adele and Mateo, and even Thundercat on the title track, which ended up on my singles of the year list. I do enjoy pockets of this project, just not the project as a whole as much as the stuff I put above it in the discography. I also think that from a narrative aspect, it kind of acts as a cool payoff moment for something that was sort of built up in one of the Tangent records, which is something I'll be talking about in just a moment. You know, the concept of seemingly Murdoch being worshipped as a god and sort of observing that as stan culture in a commentary sense. Again, it's really cool songwriting that I think creatively is tackled pretty interestingly on here. But again, comparatively, if we're talking using those allegorical concepts and spinning some cool projects out of it, is something this band has done a couple of times to great success. Cracker Island's cool. It's just something that I probably won't talk about anymore outside of one particular instance at the end of the year, possibly. It's a solid record. It's just not one that I would say is, again, as important to get to immediately as other parts of the discography.
You gotta get the pull to shine.
Now, G-sides, something that I would not normally have talked about for any other band but the Gorillaz, but acts as an interesting discussion point with this band in particular as it pertains to me, because this kind of feels like the band recreating their first album with a much different, more intimate feeling feel that removes some of the bigger scopes that I feel like their debut was toying with, and I think sticks the landing pretty well. The problem that comes with talking about G-sides is that there's two different versions of this record, and I personally do not like the US version as much, and it's because immediately out the gate, it just loses me. While both start with my preferred version of 19 through 2000 with the Soul Child remix, a version that just takes the energy that song has in, you know, a little more of a slower pace on the original and just cranks it up to its happiest place. That is one of the happiest songs to me, and I feel like the energy on it is just choice. It just takes an immediate left turn into a territory that I think just stumbles after that. While I don't hate Latin Samoan, I think leading into Dracula on the original is a better choice that leads really well into Rock the House. While the radio edit could give or take, it's still just one of my favorite Gorillaz tracks that still keeps Del the Funky Homo Sapien as a part of the universe, because one of the things they do is replace him with the Phi Life Cypher remix or version of Clint Eastwood that is on this project, and it acts as sort of an extension of keeping them on the sounder. Another really good B-side from the G-sides that has an incredible beat. I also love that the track between them, Faust, is another collaboration with Miho Hattori, who was Noodle during this era. I almost bought G-sides on vinyl. That was also kind of the reason I wanted to put it on here. One of the record stores around me had it. I don't think they do anymore. It's the US version. I love the UK version. I think that it's choice. The US version I'd probably put below Humans, because I just think that stumbling out of the gate is that rough. And omitting left-hand Suzuki method from the back half, I also think isn't as good in the US version. I think that it's a choice cut from the original that's a good album cut. It sort of flips the atmosphere from Hip Albatross pretty well, while acting as a good sort of buzz into the atmosphere before 1-2-D3 sends you into the sunset itself. I don't know, G-sides is cool, and retroactively feels like the group redacting itself and doing a sort of experiment with their own music. I respect it, and I think that it's really choice. And also has some great fucking collaborations that I understand why they were kept off of the original, but deserve to have their place in the Gorillaz ephemera, if you know what I mean. The amnesiac of the Gorillaz discography, but not held to the same album-like standard, extends the world of Demon Days with a bevy of B-sides that kind of feel like they flow like a record. Similarly to G-sides, I see D-sides sold as an album, and I would actually like to own D-sides. You know, I really enjoy the ragers that crop up on here, like We Are a Happy Landfill and Murdoch is God, which has some shredding fucking bass that, again, sort of acts like the planting to what gets paid off now. It's kind of an interesting point in hindsight in the group's discography, but I also enjoy the other texturing and atmosphere that crop up on here. Like, I love the electronic groove of Rocket, which I think is followed up incredibly well in the track listing with Bill Murray, just a bass-filled groove. Hell, all People does is flip the groove of Dare into this other hook-centric groove penned by 2D. It's a cool little flip on that adds to the world in a way that I think makes this record all the more charming, while also having a bevy of remixes of tracks from Demon Days proper. It has moments that feel like a compilation, but if in the digital age, you can trim this up into its own companion record, something I could potentially do later on down the line. While not maybe as important to get to as a Cracker Island, it's a good point of curiosity if you do find yourself becoming a fan of the band. I just think that both records, G-sides and D-sides, have a better hit ratio, or just have tracks that I think slap harder than anything on Cracker Island. I enjoy these to the point that I wanted to break my own rules and talk about them on here, because I think, unlike other bands, these are important to Gorillaz because they add more to the story, they add more to the world, they expand on what is essentially the heart of this group, which is creative energy surrounding characters and themes by and large. The companion album to Humans, The Now Now, a record that I was hyping the fuck up at the time and still really enjoy. I don't think I'd keep it at a 9 like I gave it in my original listening log. I'd probably shift it down to an 8, but I really enjoy a lot of what this record has going on still. I think that it has an incredibly good run to cement the listener in this groovy atmosphere that the record toys with throughout its runtime fantastically, with Humility through Sorcerers, which have this ebbing and flowing of intensity but keep the listener in a pocket of sorts. You know, Humans has this kineticism to it that I feel like just keeps getting interrupted a little too often with those interludes that doesn't have the same problem on the Now Now. That's the biggest reason why I think this record by and large stands above and acts as the best example of Damon taking this sort of more introspective look at the group as a whole. You know, while The Fall set this album up to succeed, it takes that concept of the Portrait of 2D and runs with it pretty far and pretty well, in my opinion. This was also the album where canonically Ace from the Gangrene Gang and the Powerpuff Girls was the basis for the band standing in for Murdoch, who was in jail. Humility's talks of desires to not be stuck in isolation felt pretty, you know, reasonable for the character of 2D, but like have aged masterfully over the last couple of years in particular. And I think that Trance carries that isolated, lonely feeling really well into bed, and I think that sort of acts as a good view of those late nights kept up and alone with your thoughts. I think that Hollywood is a good place to carry that groove in a pop-driven, collaborative sense, being one of the few moments where they work with an artist that they've worked with before, with Snoop Dogg, who chops at it pretty well on the beat here. I think that the ways that they evolve the groove throughout other parts of this, like on Kansas and Lake Zurich, which morphs the groove into these more filthy funk and dancey driven atmospheres respectively. Lake Zurich's weaving building synths across that groove just gets me every fucking time. It acts as this sort of roundup of shots one more time before the flight off into the stratosphere. It's got this really cool groove that I think is pulled together amicably well. I enjoyed this record by and large. It has a production style that I would more akin to that same intimacy heard on The Fall. I just think those ideas are reined in so much better onto here. You know, the moments where the groove is broken up and you get more of a spacious atmosphere, like on the acoustic Idaho, or the sort of airy ambient Magic City, do a good job at keeping the pace a little more varied and engage with the listener and engage with that alone isolation emotionally. While I think Damon could do it better, I do really like what the Now Now brings to the table, and I feel like if you enjoy some of the more isolated moments on tracks like Busted in Blue from Humans or Rhinestone Eyes on Plastic Beach, but you want that explored more on a record, the Now Now isn't a bad place to go in my opinion.
I'm a mad pack man, living in a leveled world. Everywhere I...
You know, it's funny, when they released the deluxe edition of Song Machine, I thought, man, I need to do a redacted of this, but really? Song Machine is just an incredible circuit of music from this creative project. It comes close to breaking the top 3, something that the band hadn't done since making a three-peat that strong. But man, is there just nothing but really good shit throughout all of Song... Like, you want a micro-redacted of Song Machine? Here you go.
Put your name in my rhyme, refresh your memory of where you wanna be. The phantom's on the way, she's coming.
Just release a version with the deluxe edition on physical media so that I can have both.
Now I feel to go for a drive, so I grab my keys. Shades on, roof down, trying to catch a breeze.
Like, the pacing, the atmosphere, the just unity across the collaborations. Like, Strange Times works really well at setting the stage of contextually living as the Gorillaz in 2020 while trying to make a dense collaborative experience to mirror humans, and just doing it so fucking well. I also talked about it during my year-end wrap-up of 2020, but the timing of dropping an album full of collaborations amidst the pandemic was just incredibly lucky. Actually making a throwback Gorillaz style marriage kind of with Beck, a clear artistic inspiration for the Gorillaz in their early career, was really fucking awesome on Valley of the Pagans. Tracks like The Lost Chord and Chalk Tablet Towers do a good job at introducing the more airier atmospheres that would get twisted on with collaborations like The Pink Phantom, which see Elton John and Black just working incredibly well with Damon. I love the laid-back groove and the piano leads of that track, and I think that acting as a sort of really slowing down of the energy after Chalk Tablet Tower sort of starts that by bringing the groove down a bit before ramping it up into, you already know, one of my favorite new Gorillaz tracks, Aries, is just masterfully done. The hip-hop collaborations as a whole on here, fucking choice. I love Schoolboy Q on Pac-Man. I really like Octavarian on Friday the 13th, and I think that Kano on Dead Butterflies is also pretty fucking choice. Big yikes. Slow Tie feels like he started his pivot to what would inspire his most recent album on this project. And the deluxe edition is just more great shit, with Opium having this great extended dance atmosphere that Earth Gang just excels in. Severed Head also has that dance-driven groove just excelled in. Peggy working with the Gorillaz is just incredible on its own, but MLS is another choice fucking cut. And closing it all off in a deluxe sense with How Far feels like a fitting send-off to this era. As far as a perfect storm for the Gorillaz, Strange Times feels like that to a T, and I really love to see it come together. I honestly absolutely adore this album, and like, easily one of my favorite albums to drop in the 2020s by and large. I fucking love this project, and I think that as far as carrying the energy from Humans and building upon it tenfold, that's how you do it, man. Hell, I'd even argue if the flavors on, like, their self-titled hadn't hooked you enough to dive into a full record, I would listen to Strange Times first, because it's a better sort of modernization of their approach to, or Damon's approach to the music side of things, but with a great melding of collaborations that bring the old versus new, or old meets new aspect that was in Humans, but harmonizes the two more consistently throughout the runtime by and large. And I feel like starting here and working your way around some of the other highlights could be a good way to go, because this is just an incredible run.
Going on my head down to somewhere.
Now, this debut, I could see not being this high on somebody else's personal ranking with this band, and I understand and obviously observe that they've done better than this debut. I think personally, this is absolutely personal bias coming into effect here. This album holds a lot to me, on top of just having a tapestry production-wise that I also tend to prefer, given a lot of the stuff that I've championed as classics in my own personal top echelon of all-time records. You know, could I see somebody liking a record like Song Machine more? Absolutely. Or even some of the newer stuff. If you don't necessarily like trip-hop heavy sounds, I could see you liking other records of theirs more. But I feel like as far as putting your foot forward and creating a world that marries video with audio in some instances, while also just having an interesting songwriting style and an album approach, this Gorillaz debut is pretty fucking choice in my opinion. And I like the avenues that this record explores, especially given that within this world they've had a whole B-sides collection that I also wanted to talk about. There's just a lot of cool ideas on here. You know, I've already talked about the classics and the singles, some of the singles on here, with Clint Eastwood and Rock the House being on my favorite Gorillaz tracks list, but I think that those are great showcases of the Gorillaz world and production style that this album leans with having a good harnessing of a hip-hop sound. You know, the beats on there are fucking choice, and that melodica stuff on Clint Eastwood also kind of gets a nice little payoff in the form of also being on Tomorrow Comes Today and having a really good riff on there. Those hip-hop ideas coming up on tracks like the more trip-hop heavy New Genius Brother, which has some great sample work in there, sound checks, ambience, adds to that trip-hop style masterfully as well. You know, while I talked about loving the Soul Child remix of 19-2000 more, I do enjoy the original. I think that it also acts as a good place for the grooves in this soundscape to go to, and I think having Miho Hattori as a part of that not only acts as sort of a respect to a group that has, I think, had been defunct by the time of recording this album, but it's just a nice place for Miho to go after Chibamato, in my opinion. And I like that she also gets to crop up on other parts of this era. The more guitar-driven stuff like 5/4 with its fun groove and Punk's energy, and the ambient foreboding track M1A1 add to the atmosphere all the more. That Beck influence coming in tenfold on Latin Simone, I think, is a cool place for this album to end up. Hell, the laid-back groove on Dracula and the flipping of Ghost Town on Slow Country are great moments where the groove sort of settles into a more low-key realm. There's a lot of cool ideas on this that I think just hold up and act as a good proof of concept and first step forward for a good creative outlet like this. I love this album a lot. You know, it's easily a classic, and if you want my starting point, or a good starting point in my opinion, I think their debut is a good one. Is it going to be the best for everyone? No, but I think it is a good starting point for somebody who wants to get into the band chronologically. I think that it's a good avenue for which to do so. Again, could I see people liking other records of theirs more than this that I've put below? Sure. But obviously, there's other records I love more than this too, like... One of the things I would do a lot around this album's release was go onto the Gorillaz website and click around Kong HQ. I would look for the Easter eggs, I would watch the music videos, I would look at the art, and I would just have fun, because it was an interesting thing to do back in the day. And the music to accompany all of that fun flavor stuff that evolved throughout the album cycle is also just a bona fide classic, and similarly to D-sides from G-sides, Demon Days just comes to fucking play in a way that exceeds and expands on everything from that debut fucking incredibly, by creating an album that both improves upon and makes really great expansions on the sonic palette of the debut, while also focusing all that writing into a bigger concept on reflections of man and the demon's one faces. You know, it gets really bleak and apocalyptic, like on the opener, Last Living Souls, which has this great evolution across its beat. You know, even extending those themes of kids with guns even farther into the collaboration with Booty Bound, Dirty Harry, an underrated fucking track in my opinion, while also carrying this parallel of the extremes of Demons and Man going into the destruction of the world, or the growing greater destruction of the world on tracks like Oh Green World, Every Planet We Reach Is Dead, and Fire Coming Out of a Monkey's Head, which is a spoken word piece with Dennis Hopper, with a groove holding the track together at its core. While Dennis Hopper just talks about a city dissolving into itself due to corruption and a thriving greed fueled by war. It's a point that really hammers the themes of the record's broader concepts, or, you know, loose thematics into a really firm head that I think hits a home run with its execution. The apocalyptic energy coming into the fray also in tracks like November Has Come, another track that I've talked about loving, a collaboration with the late great MF Doom. The classic Feel Good Inc. also lays on here, a track that further enhanced the group's success by being one of the biggest tracks of the 2000s and a modern classic as far as hit singles go. It's everything a good follow-up record should be at creating this emotional, instrumental, and just lyrical follow-through that explores many different assets and thematics, all surrounding this bleak feel. Everything down to other album cuts like Manana just do nothing but enhance that feeling of bleakness across these demon days. It's a classic. One of my favorite albums of all time. I love the instrumental palette of this, like I do the self-titled debut, and I think that as far as getting other great collaborations in the pot, this does that tenfold.
Look, yo, no cost to wait.
There is some magical grandness on Plastic Beach, though, that is just immaculate. I talked about this in my favorite albums of the 2010s video pretty highly. It's one of my top 50 favorite records of all time. This album is equal parts beautiful and heartbreaking. I think that the scale that is on this record is fully realized. You know, opening with this orchestra feels so very Gorillaz, but still feels larger than life in a way that the Gorillaz hadn't quite reached yet, amidst writing about these apocalyptic feelings on the prior record to this. I think it also adds to the overall sheen of this record to emulate the Plastic Beach, as it were. All of the production on this is sleek as fuck. If there's one album I'm glad to own on vinyl, it's Plastic Beach. It's one that I bought on CD when it came out. It's one that was immediately on the hype train for me, because by this point it had been a while since the last Gorillaz record, and it was just everything I'd hoped it would be. Snoop Dogg coming in with this sleek introduction to this project after the orchestral intro is beautiful. The extensions of that grandiosity into White Flag after that, fucking incredible. It adds to this cinematic feeling that the album has, and its music videos tried to portray in some instances, like on the lead single Stylo, which was this well-shot car chase featuring the graphical upgrade to the band as a whole, with a A-list star like Bruce Willis in a gunfight with them, which gave to some other cool, fun, quirky moments in other singles, like the beat construction on Superfast Jellyfish, which feels very inspired by, you know, working with artists like De La Soul and MF Doom. And using that grandiosity flipped into the beat of Sweepstakes with Mos Def was also a really cool choice. But the other magic of Plastic Beach lies in a lot of the synth work as well. My favorite Gorillaz song is on this project, along with a handful of other top 10 Gorillaz classic. You guys know I love that huge drop on Empire Ants. I think that that also is channeled really well on the grandiosity on the hook of Broken. I think that that intimacy on tracks like Rhinestone Eyes and on Melancholy Hill is also just tapped into so immaculately. That synthetic harmony also coming together on a couple of the few select guitar implemented moments, like on the Lou Reed collaboration Some Kind of Nature, or the Mick Jones collaboration title track, which has a good job of adding some good synthetic density to that sort of what starts as a sandy textured atmosphere, a sort of element that creeps in on Glitter Freeze masterfully too. There's just so many good chef's kiss musical moments on this classic. I could see this also being a starting point for people into Gorillaz, because it is an experiment that sees them not losing their roots, but finding interesting ways to interpolate them to fit the thematics and writing of this world as a plastic beach, and a sort of conversation on environmentalism as a whole, and the world as it's been built, with the sort of grind set to humans, and everything being far less human in a plastic world. It's a really cool concept lyrically that just has a musical palette to suit it just as well. I love this record, and I could see it being as much of a starting point as a record like their self-titled, and being a point where it could also be seen as somebody's favorite. Those are my thoughts on the Gorillaz discography. What have you thought of this video? Have you liked it? Have you not? Let me know in the comments down below. If you did like it, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys will get into lives and situations, and I'll see you another day.